I am convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt that Tony from Calhoun County is too smart to be listening to talk radio, in particular this show. Or there may be a certain intellectual attempt at talk radio, this isn't it, when he kind of gets into the weeds about Jefferson and representative republics and democracies. But he's right. A representative form of government, I mean, a republic is a representative form of government according to whatever charter or constitution you may have instituted as a result of it. A democracy is basically, I don't want to say mob rule. If I was trying to be provocative, I'd say mob rule. But it's the will of the majority. And we don't live in a country. If we lived in a democracy, we'd have term limits. If we lived in a democracy, we'd have a balanced budget amendment. But our representatives have decided they don't like to vote themselves out of office, and they like spending money that we don't have. So Tony's exactly right. A republic is a representative form of government according to the charter or constitution, and democracies are where the majority wins every single time. I served with a guy on county council real quick, and he wanted to have a referendum about everything. He didn't want to vote on anything because he felt there were consequences to him casting a vote. So we decide whether to, do we pave Oak Street or Walnut Street? And he would say, we'd have a referendum. I was like, damn, Bo. I mean, you can't have a referendum on everything that comes down the pike. And
is that how you said it?
Yeah.
Damn, Bo.
Well, you know how I am. I mean, he understood clearly. If I'd have said, hey, let's you and I, counter argue, he would have had a clue what I was talking about. But yeah, damn, Bo, he really understood. He's from Timmonsville, man. I'm from Pamplico. That's how.
There you go.
That's how we converse or conversate one with another. Hey, we have a call. Ellen Weaver, who is a Republican candidate, two left standing after a crowded field for superintendent of education. There are two Republican candidates that are preparing as we speak for a runoff Tuesday. Ellen is with us in the studio this morning, but we've got some breaking news here at Wake Up Carolina, and I'm not going to attempt to steal the thunder much as I'd like to. I'm going to defer to our guest who's called in, if I'm not mistaken, and that is Representative Russell Fry, who is a member of the South Carolina General Assembly, but he's also Republican nominee for the 7th Congressional District. Trump-endorsed Republican nominee for the 7th Congressional District, defeated Tom Rice last Tuesday, and he's going to make some news on our feeble attempt at radio brilliance. Russell, are you there?
I am here, sir. How are y'all this morning?
So you're not calling in, as you normally do, soliciting support for your campaign and on your behalf. You're here to do it for someone else, so I'll get out of the way and let you and Ellen do your thing.
Yeah, no, I am in the strongest possible way giving my full endorsement to Ellen Weaver. I think that this is the year of the parent. I think we saw this out of Virginia, Ken, where parents woke up, and when you have the education establishment saying that parents should not be involved in the classroom, and Republicans went up and down the ballot, elected a Republican governor for the first time. I mean, this is the year of the parent. And I think COVID really highlighted a need for parental involvement, for a focus on teachers, for a focus on students. And I think Ellen Weaver is that clear choice. I think she has been a remarkable bright spot in education policy. I've certainly worked with her on education policy, on school choice. And if we want the status quo to continue, then Maness is your candidate. But if we want somebody who thinks that all aspects of education are important, that teachers are important, that students are important, and that parents have a role in their child's education, then look no further than Ellen Weaver. I know her heart. I know she's done tireless work on this subject, and I really think that she would do very well as our next superintendent of education.
And Ellen, I know you want to thank Russell for that endorsement.
Oh, I'd love to. Russell, I'm incredibly honored. You really cleaned up on primary day because you ran a strong America First campaign. And that's really, I think, the choice that we have. You laid it out very clearly. We have a Republican in this race who stood up for parents' rights, who stood up for students, and who's going to fight for teachers. And we have someone in this race who carries water for the education establishment that's often Democrat. Let's just be real. And so I'm so honored and grateful to have your support. And I'm excited to be barnstorming through the 4th with you later, or the 7th with you later today. So we're looking forward to it. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I would encourage all your listeners, Ken. I mean, just this didn't get a lot of attention, particularly in our area, because my race seemed to have the most attention. But it's so important to get back out on Tuesday, the 28th. It's coming up next Tuesday to vote again. I mean, education is on the ballot. The future of our schools is on the ballot. Our children's future is on the ballot, and parents' involvement in education is on the ballot. And so we need to think about that. Whether you have kids in public schools, private schools, or not in school at all, we all have a stake in that outcome. We all have a role to play, and it starts by electing a conservative reformer, Ellen Weaver, to the superintendent of education post.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Russell. I couldn't have said it any better myself. The records of me and my opponent could not be more diametrically opposed. While she was fighting against Governor McMaster to reopen classrooms, while she was opposing what y'all were doing in the General Assembly to roll back mask mandates and put parents in charge of medical decisions for their children, I was standing with the governor to reopen classrooms, to expand school choice, to save our women's sports. I mean, we just got to get back to common sense and education. That's the bottom line. We have lost our way. And I couldn't have said it any better than you did. I mean, the future of our state, the future of the country is at stake here. We are fighting for the hearts and the minds of children against a very woke, liberal, progressive ideology that is being force-fed to teachers from Washington. We've got to stand up for our teachers, stand up for our students, and really restore authority to parents. So I'm honored to stand with you in this fight and so grateful to have your support.
Thank you,
Happy
Russell.
to give it.
Thank you very much, my man, and I'm sure we'll see you down the road. Russell Fry, who is a frequent visitor to us, once again, this feeble attempt at Radio Bristol. I want to get to Ellen for a second, and I want to reflect for just a moment. I want to go back to 2010 when I ran for Lieutenant Governor. Mick Zase was the Republican nominee for Superintendent of Education, and I remember just thinking out loud, that's a different kind of guy than you normally see as the Superintendent of Education, and it dawned on me over the years that we talk about, the establishment and self-preservation as staying, the status quo politics. Nothing reflects that or embodies that more than education. As a political candidate, it's easy to say the establishment this, but no, in all seriousness, guys, and I mean this with our listeners, the establishment and the self-preservationist mindset has disallowed our state to progress as necessary to compete in a global economy because when you look at advance and proficiencies, we're in decline. I mean, our trajectories, our trend lines are not good. And why would we consider not changing the model if we're getting the same thing over and over again? And that's something you are very serious about. And I've always considered you to be somewhat of a reformer in education. But it's challenging. It's difficult to break that stranglehold.
Well, it is. And Ken, it really, like so much in life, comes down to power and money. There are people who have built a career and a business model on the way things currently are, and they don't want that to change. When our education conversations are more about the adults than the children, we've lost our way. I talk all the time about the idea that we need public education that actually means an educated public, not just a system of buildings and buses, but an education system that is actually meeting kids and families where they are, getting them into the education environment that best fits them, and allowing them to reach their full God-given potential. But you're right, there is an education empire out there. I say the empire always strikes back, and they're fighting hard against me because they understand that I am a reformer who's willing to take a fresh look at things, who has the backbone to stand up and say what it is and go out and build the coalitions and the support that it's going to take to change our system. And you really hit the nail on the head. I mean, we can't afford to wait. States all around us for the last couple of decades have been moving to reform their education systems, to focus on early literacy, to expand school choice, to do all of these things that we know actually moves the needle for kids. South Carolina is getting left behind. And I just say that's not okay. And under my superintendency, we're going to do it differently.
Ellen, what does school choice mean to you?
School choice is fundamentally about giving parents the ability to get their child into the education system that is best for them. Period. Full stop. Every kid
The money follows the kid.
Money follows the child. That's exactly right. Every student is different. And the great thing is that we see school choice working in other states. I look at states like Florida that have had some of the oldest and largest school choice programs in the country, last 20 years. And everybody is doing better in Florida. There was a study that just came out that said, if you look at the communities where there is the highest concentration of parents in charge, school choice, money following the student, public school students do better. Why is that? Competition, Ken. It's common sense. It's what we stand for as Republicans. Free market common sense. It works in business. It works in every other sector. It works in education too. And it's not just about the kids. It's about teachers. I hear from teachers all the time who are so burned out by the red tape and the lack of discipline and the lack of support they feel in our public education system. School choice creates a market for teachers' talents too. Let a teacher find the right education environment for them, whether that's a charter school, a magnet school, maybe they're a teacher in a homeschool co-op. I mean, there are so many different things that we can do to empower not just parents and students, but teachers. And that's really what school choice is all about.
What sort of metric and measure would you use or apply in identifying the good teachers and the not so good?
I think everybody who works in a school knows who the good teachers are and knows who the poor teachers are, right? And so I think there's a lot of room that we can do to coach teachers who need to be coached, to get back to common sense. Like, let's just be real. I've been made aware of some of this crazy professional development that is being forced on teachers that, revolves around DE&I, diversity, equity, and inclusion stuff, all this woke nonsense, CRT. Like, we've got to stop force feeding that stuff to our teachers and telling them that that's their role in the classroom. We need to let them get back to teaching the basics. And that's really what this campaign is about. Let's get back to common sense. Let's teach kids the basic skills that they have to be successful in life. Our teachers will be happier. Our parents will be happier. And I know for sure the people who are hiring those kids on the other side of graduation are going to be happier too.
We had an extensive conversation knowing that you were going to be here today, and a lot of our show today is revolved around education. Sunday was Father's Day. 35% of the kids going to public education leave a home with a single parent. 85 of the 35% leave a home without a father there. The superintendent of education can't mandate people get married and stay married, but how can we address those kids who are coming not as prepared as others?
Well, that's a great question. And, like you said, unfortunately, the education system can't fix the breakdown of the family. But what we can do is be strategic and thoughtful in how we build partnerships to engage mentors in our public schools, how we engage parents in the conversation around what's happening in our schools. I look at what happened in Louisiana. There was an incredible movement amongst parents. They had like 21 kids in this one school that had been arrested in a couple of week period. And so several dads in that school said enough is enough. And so they started this thing called Dads on Duty, where they took rotating turns coming in, just walking the halls of the school, being present, supporting teachers, helping with discipline enforcement, and just setting a good example for kids. I mean, I think there's a lot of really common sense things that we can do to better engage the community, to open the doors of our schools and say, come in, we need you to be tutors. We need you to be mentors. We need you to help support these kids and provide a role model where they may not have a role model in their lives if you don't step up and do this. So it's really about, the entire community working together. I tell people all the time on the campaign trail, I'm not just asking for your vote on June 28th, although I am. I need you to get out and vote on June 28th. I'm asking for your volunteerism after June 28th, because when I'm superintendent, I'm going to be putting out a call to action to our faith communities, to our nonprofit communities, to our business community to come join me in doing what we have to do to provide great mentorship for our students and to better support our teachers.
Okay, let's take a break. Ellen Weaver is with us, Republican candidate, superintendent of education. I've got some questions about safety and security. And do we kind of steer every kid to a 4-year degree when there should be some other options and alternatives? Back in just a minute. Do want to remind our listeners that Thursday night at 7 o'clock, if I'm not mistaken, why did we do this at 6? I mean, 7 o'clock gets into the Braves game. I mean, the Braves start at 7:20. We could have a debate at 6, finish by 7, get you a smoothie, go watch the Braves, and then go to bed. But no, you guys had to push the debate back until 7 o'clock, so it'll be, 8:15 or 20 getting home. Is there overtime pay associated with this?
For you? Sure.
Okay. Big deal. Yeah, there you go. You go.
Just turn it in.
We have two candidates, Kathy Manis and Ellen Weaver. Turn it in.
Just turn
I've never
it in.
turned anything in. You know that. I do this out of the goodness of my heart. I'm a public servant. Once won, always won.
Okay.
Ellen Weaver's with us. She's a candidate, Republican candidate, superintendent of education. I've got some questions for the debate, but I don't want to be redundant. I'm not asking the same questions. I think debate formats require a certain degree of confrontation and contrast. But there is something out there that you've had to address, and that is a qualification issue. There is a requirement via the General Assembly. We actually had somebody dig into the Constitution this morning and say the General Assembly can demand certain prerequisites or qualifications. Give us the skinny on the story that you don't have the necessary qualifications to be superintendent of education.
Thank you for the chance to clarify this, Ken, because let me tell you, my opponent can't defend her own record and tell the truth about that, so she's out there trying to create confusion about mine. I'm going to be fully qualified to assume this office. The plain reading of the law is that the superintendent has to have a master's degree. That means when I am sworn in January of 2023, I must hold a master's degree. There are absolutely no qualifications tied to actually running and being a candidate. That said, I'm going to have my master's completed in October, so by the time of the general election, there will be absolutely no question that I will fully meet every criteria that is required by law to assume office in January of 2023. And I want to take it a step further because my opponent's been out there spreading misinformation. I'd call them straight out lies about what happens if her worst case scenario comes to pass and I win this election and say, I got kicked off the ballot or something like that, which is what she's telling everybody is going to happen. Well, let me tell you, if I could get kicked off the ballot, she would have already done it. So let's just start with that. But secondly, she's telling people that a Democrat judge will decide who the next superintendent is or that, it will default to the Democratic candidate. That's just not true under South Carolina election law. This election decision never leaves the hands of the people of this state. There will always be a qualified Republican nominee in this race. And I'm here to tell you today, I will have the qualifications and I am that qualified nominee to be the next Republican superintendent.
Fair enough. The majority of Americans have become horrified by school shootings. It's unbelievable to me, the human depravity, the evil. We can go down whatever road you choose to for someone to walk onto a school grounds with the intent to murder innocent children. I mean, that's something that I don't think anybody with any sanity can come to grips with, but it is a reality in our culture and society. As superintendent of education, express yourself on security, safety, arming teachers. Kind of walk me through what the Weaver plan is to the parent of a kid who drops off that kid at school, the most precious commodity in their life. What does Ellen Weaver think needs to be the priorities in making sure these kids are kept safe?
Well, let's be clear. If children aren't safe, nothing else matters, right? That's our number one priority. And so I will finish the job working with the governor and the General Assembly to make sure that we have an armed school resource officer in every single school in this state. In the last 4 years, we've doubled the number of SROs, as they call them, that are on duty in our schools. We have about 300 plus more schools that we still need to get an SRO into. So that's got to be a budget priority for us. I also think we can look at ideas that other states have piloted, such as Virginia. They have a school safety officer that is not a sworn law enforcement officer, but is someone who has gone through extensive training and knows how to handle a weapon. So, I think about like the veterans that are in our community that could be a school safety officer. And they've already proven that they want to serve their country and their community. What better way to do it than to help keep our children safe? And, you brought up the issue of arming teachers. I don't think any teacher should be forced to carry a weapon, but I believe it should be the teacher's choice. And I think that there has to be very robust training associated with that. This is a a very intense situation that you are in when you are carrying firearms around young children. Our law enforcement has to go through extensive training to be able to respond appropriately in those very tense situations. And so I would not want to put that pressure on any teacher who doesn't want it. But if a teacher goes through the training required to carry, I would be okay with that.
There's an increase in pay in line there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We have got to do better getting money out of bureaucracy right now. I mean, we're not underfunding education in this state. We're misfunding education. We're building district Taj Mahals and paying six-figure salaries to people who aren't in the classrooms, and we're not supporting our teachers like they should be. So that's one of the first orders of business when I'm superintendent. We've got to work with the General Assembly to get a hold of our funding system and create transparency for where all that money, over $12 billion, is going every year.
A lot of Republicans are frustrated with centralized power. They talk about Washington a lot, but indeed, some of the centralization of education policy is not, it doesn't offer local autonomy to some of the local superintendents, school boards. I don't have a specific question, but philosophically, where are you with Columbia Knows Best, or delegating some of that autonomy and authority to superintendents and local school boards?
Well, I do believe in local control, but local control has to be responsive to local people. And unfortunately, during COVID, we saw a lot of our school boards who are not responsive to their constituents. They were not listening to parents. When Russell called in, he was talking a little bit about how we saw what happened in Virginia, where there was a wave election. I mean, they elected a Republican governor in a purple state because of this education issue, because parents weren't being listened to. And so I think, we've seen here in South Carolina, new school board members elected. I think we need to continue to see new school board members elected that are responsive to parents and the concerns that parents and teachers have. My philosophy as superintendent, when I approach any policy question, is really three big ideas. It's, how do we create the most flexibility at the local level? Because our communities in South Carolina are different. Greenville has different needs than Charleston. Charleston has different needs than Florence. Florence has different needs than, Pamplico, right? So, there are differences that we have got to acknowledge. So flexibility is the first thing, but in exchange for that flexibility, there has to be responsibility. There has to be responsibility for student learning. We have to know that our kids are getting the education they need to be prepared in life. And there has to be responsibility for money and how it's being spent. There has to be transparency. So it's flexibility, responsibility, and fairness. As Republicans, we're about fairness. And so there's a lot of disparity across this state in terms of urban versus rural, and a lot of other things, charter versus traditional public. So we've got to look at how to fairly fund every student in this state. You
mentioned urban versus rural in Pamplico. There is no doubt that we've seen a dramatic decline in rural America. The lack of opportunity, textiles and farming. I mean, I grew up in a small town that offered hope and opportunity. We don't see much of that anymore. And as a result, many education experts believe consolidation is inevitable. What would a Weaver administration look like in addressing some of the financial and reality? I mean, there are real challenges of rural America not having the resources. But the school district is part of that local brand, that community identity. Walk me through what you think the priorities of consolidation and the challenges of some of the rural school districts are.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's really common sense things that we can do to increase shared services, right? To get high quality, say, an IT person, right? There's no reason why you would have to have multiple IT people at neighboring districts that have only a few thousand students maybe between them. So you could get a much higher quality person if you were sharing those services. And that's already happening in some districts, but continuing to build, I think, incentives for districts to look at that kind of model makes a lot of sense. We have made progress in consolidating some of our small and shrinking districts in this state over the last few years. The General Assembly has created incentives for district leaders to come to the table and to discuss how can they come together to cut some of this overhead, this bureaucracy-heavy overhead that's sitting in district offices, and figure out how you can actually get the money back to students. I also think about, in rural communities, the opportunity that we have to really harness technology and world-class teaching. So we know that technology is never going to replace a great teacher in the classroom, but we also know that there's incredibly high-quality content out there that could be brought into rural classrooms and expose them to the very best teaching and learning opportunities that any student in the state has. And so these require new funding paradigms to allow districts to pay for those kind of services, It's getting money out of the silos that it's currently in. I mean, we have one of the most complicated funding formulas in the entire country here in South Carolina. It's broken, it's not working, and we've got to figure out how to, as I said before, create that flexibility that can allow our rural communities to really flourish.
The art of talk radio is to be provocative, to be somewhat entertaining. It's not enlightening. It's not a Harvard class. It's not, someone trying to get a PhD. But I want to say something that some would interpret as provocative. I don't. And that is, I think K through 12 education has to normalize not going to college. It seems to me we've geared K through 12 at the ultimate and only responsible thing to do is to get a 4-year degree. Am I crazy when I say normalize not going to college?
We have got to celebrate success wherever it happens. I'm going to give you a personal example. So I went to a 4-year school, graduated with a bachelor in political science, right? And I've had a great career, a great life as a result of that education. My brother took a very different track. He got a GED and went straight into the military. I'm going to tell you something. He's making more money than I am now. And so, there are many paths to success, and we have got to get over this idea that in order to be a successful person, you have to go to a 4-year college. And let's just be real. A lot of this crazy woke stuff that we see in our culture and now in our K-12 schools started in institutions of higher education. So why in the world are parents going to pay, or children pay, thousands upon thousands of dollars, enough to, buy a mortgage in some instances, to go sit in a classroom where there's getting force-fed woke indoctrination? I mean, that doesn't make any sense. They need to be applying and learning real-world skills. So I think, I don't know, I'm a fan of Mike Rowe, Dirty Jobs. I mean, he's talked about this a lot. We need to celebrate work and work ethic and reward success however that is. So whether that's going into the military, whether that's going to a technical school, or whether that's going to a 4-year college, we've got to make sure parents understand that there's just not one pathway to success.
Should a superintendent of education reach out to the business community, advancing apprenticeship programs, co-op sorts of opportunities, and identifying these kids? A kid doesn't need to be identified as a 12th grader.
That's right.
It needs to happen somewhere in the interim. And I think outreach toward the private sector, is that something? You're nodding your head.
Absolutely. I mean, we've got to explore partnerships for our students to get real world application of what they're learning, because that's how we reinforce what happens in the classroom. And it's also how we keep students engaged. Let them explore the career options that are out there, get their hands dirty, learn. And you're not only learning academic skills when you do that, you're learning life skills. You're learning how to look somebody in the eye, learning how to have a firm handshake, learning these soft skills that are going to be essential for them to succeed in whatever they end up doing. So I think involving our business community in this conversation is a non-negotiable. We talked a little bit earlier, too, about family issues that we have here in South Carolina. It's not just the business community, it's the faith community. I mean, we've got to get our faith community more engaged in mentoring these students so that when they go out into the real world, they're prepared to be successful.
We found out during COVID that virtual learning was not as effective as, traditional in-class student facing a teacher interacting with the student. But there is this reality that we are living in a more virtual world. Weird question. How do we make virtual learning better? What did we learn via COVID about the ineffectiveness of virtual learning?
It's a great question. And I want to draw a bright distinction between what happened during COVID and what high quality virtual learning looks like. So, I mean, our districts were basically forced to pivot in a 2-day period from being in the classroom to being virtual. They just weren't equipped to do that. That's the bottom line. So unfortunately, I think virtual education has gotten a bad rap because of that. You're absolutely right. There is no replacement for being in person with your peers and with your teacher. But you can have high quality content that is delivered through a virtual platform. Why couldn't we have the teacher of the year in history teaching classes all over this state, right? Technology makes that possible. So I think there's a lot that we can do to harness technology, but we can't let technology take over everything. It will never replace that person-to-person contact, and we know that. Okay,
let's take a break. We'll be back for our last segment with our Republican candidate for Superintendent of Education, Ellen Weaver. Runoff on Tuesday, if I'm not mistaken, and we're having a debate Thursday night. It'll be live on our network of stations. Am I right? You help me here.
That's right.
Mr. Program Extraordinaire.
Yeah, that's right.
Sumter, Orangeburg, and Florence.
If you're hearing us now, this station will have the debate on the air at 7 p.m. Thursday.
Good deal. We'll take a break. We'll be back in just a minute.